is Tuesday at 1 o'clock, so I am back with another live. So, okay. I'm supposed to wait. Instagram's telling me to wait. Anyway, I'm gonna have a cup of tea. Hello. So I'm in the studio at SDSU, San Diego State University. It's a beautiful, like 80-degree day out today, but it's still kind of chilly in the studio, so we're still bundled up drinking hot tea. Hello. So we're here in the studio at San Diego State University, and I am working on the coil-built vessel. So we started with a scale drawing of a research piece, and then we started to build. So this is, I don't know if this is the second or third day of coil building, but the pot has firmed up quite a bit. So it's really, not quite leather hard, but approaching leather hard. So there's a couple interesting things we can do now. We definitely want to add some coils because we need to reach 12 inches tall. And we may get there today, we may not. I came in a little early today, and I made a ton of coils, so I can just build all day long. So you can see, and you can even hear how the pot has firmed up a bit, and it's not gonna wiggle at all, and I can handle it. Incidentally, whether it's throne work or hand-built work, when you are picking up a piece, always pick it up with two hands from the bottom. Sometimes if you pick it up from the edge, you can crack off like a cookie bite. And even if you don't do that, you could stress the edge enough that in the drying and firing, it could crack out of memory of that insult. So you don't want to pick your piece up by the edge like this. You always want to try to lift it with two hands and kind of support it so you don't stress the walls. A couple of things I wanted to show you today that it may be a little premature to start smoothing the surface, but we are going to add surface design to these pieces. And for that reason, we want a somewhat smooth surface. Now these are hand-built objects, so therefore they're never going to be, perfect smoothness. They're not intended to be that way. They're intended to sort of look like the ancient artifacts that we based our research on. So with that being said, we still want a smooth enough surface so that we can create some surface design without too much trouble. So one of the ways we do that is use our serrated rib. Now in your 8-piece toolkit, there's a little piece of sheet metal that's an oval, and every disc-like thing in ceramics is called a rib, like from your rib cage. And they come in wood and rubber and metal. And the one that's in the 8-piece toolkit, that's your standard, is super sharp. It's almost like you can cut yourself if you're not careful. But this one is very similar, except it has a serrated edge. So it has like these teeth. And they will wear down over time, but it's super useful because counterintuitively, when we want to smooth the surface of the coil-built pot, we actually want to rough it up first. So we do that by scratching back and forth, roughing up that surface, and you scrape a little bit of material off, but not really that much. When you scrape off a little bit of material, that can just go, into your slip container. And then usually we use a spray bottle, but in COVID times, we don't have shared tools, so we don't have a spray bottle. I just dampen it a little bit, and then take a rib, whether rubber or metal, and while supporting the inside, just drag drag that rib while supporting the inside and just drag that moisture, and what happens is it creates a smooth surface, and you can tell the difference, right? It starts to reflect a little light back at you. And one of the things we love about greenware, about wet clay, is its moisture content reflects light back. So it's so pretty when we're working with it. It almost like glows a little bit. So that's what we're looking for in the surface of the coil pot when we're smoothing. Now, normally I would wait till the whole thing is built before I do a ton of finishing work, because obviously we're going to touch this quite a bit. And if you know, it's like with any artwork, if you get too detailed too fast, you end up undoing it. So it's sort of a waste of time. But it's nice to know that you can get a certain level of smoothness with this technique. The other thing I wanted to show you today is the paddle. So we're at SDSU, and I'm sure Richard Burkett made this out of a beautiful piece of hardwood with a saw and a sander, but it's really just like a 2x4. And if you have a 2x4 in the garage, then it will work just fine even without the beautiful honed handle. So, and you know what? A wooden spoon will work fine. And it's actually probably more of a 1x3. Just 1x3s don't sound as funny as 2x4s. Anyway, we have this paddle. It's just a piece of wood, right? There's no paint or finish on it, so it's super porous. And what we can do is we can gently tap the surface of our piece and compress the clay a little bit. You can hit it pretty hard as long as you're supporting the inside. If you're not supporting the inside, you're gonna destroy your piece. So with compression, you're always supporting both sides. Now, this I would use a paddle. When I have a larger pot, I'll show you how to use a paddle to change the shape of the pot. Well, at this stage, what we'll really use the paddle for is making sure our pot is level. Now, you guys are a little bit higher than I am, but so you're kind of looking down to the inside of the pot. But I have a level in the studio, and I use it to make sure that the edge of my piece is level before I start building up. Because if you continue to add on an unlevel pot, you're gonna get an unlevel pot. So one of the ways to level off is to compress with the paddle. So we get this fancy paddle, or your 2x4 or 1x3, or even your wooden spoon, and just support it. So I'm pinching it kind of like this, and I'm just tapping it down. And as I tap that down, I'm compressing it, and I'm gonna add a little bit more pressure to where it's too tall. Now you could just take a knife and start shaving it down, but I don't know if you've had this experience, but when I take a knife and start shaving down the rim of something, I'm always doing it unevenly, and I end up just taking off way more than absolutely necessary. So at the end of the day, our goal is to build some height here. So we don't want to remove material if we don't have to, especially if we can have the bonus of a more compressed pot. So that's when I will check my level again, and you want to check it in a couple of places. Yeah, and that's much better now. So in the process of recording demonstrations for my online class, I've actually made 2 coil pots, but this one adheres more correctly to my scale drawing. It was, and probably still is, I may have lost a little bit of height, about 5 inches tall. And at 5 inches tall, it was supposed to be about 7.5 inches wide. And so we're pretty much right there. So I'm going to continue with both of these pieces, but I'm going to make this one adhere more strictly to my drawing. So we know from last week that if you are going to add a coil or coils to a piece of a work in progress, you have to slip and score really well. So because this clay is quite a bit drier than the clay I just created coils with, so I'm using this multi-pronged scoring tool. Your needle tool is fine. You'll just have to make more scoring effort. And these are China Clay Company, and I usually buy like 3 or 4 of them at a time, and then for some reason by the end of the semester I don't have any left, which is why I've taken to like spray painting them purple, so that hopefully I can find them. They're small enough to get lost, and they're also super useful, so people borrow them a lot. Anyway, that's kind of what they're for. So I made some slip with my clay body by drying clay and slaking it in water, and then I let it just kind of become this chunky goo. This is really nice slip. And so I scored really deeply. And I'm gonna add that first coil. So the first coil, you need to slip and score really well. Now, we are adding fresh clay coils, which I'm keeping wrapped under plastic. You can probably hear the plastic a little bit. I'm keeping them wrapped under plastic because I want all of that moisture to be retained. But we are adding fresh clay coils to an almost leather hard pot. So the slipping and scoring is really important, but then it's also really important that once we get that coil attached really well compressed, that we cover that juncture, that seam. You can leave it uncovered while you're working, but it's especially important to cover this place where these 2 coils meet. We want to get a little wider too. And let the clay kind of equalize with regard to moisture levels. So this is going to be super wet and sticky clay. This is going to be almost leather hard clay. We're slipping and scoring really well, so we're confident that it's going to adhere. But in the drying, not so quite long enough. In the drying, we want it to catch up. We want the wet clay to catch up to the almost leather hard clay. Once it's equalized, then it can dry. Together. So I want this pot to get a little bigger, so I put the coil a tiny bit on the outside, just a tiny bit. And then with the first coil, oftentimes you don't get a lot of height. You're just kind of preparing this pot to receive more coils. I'm gonna go grab a tool. So this dumb wooden tool is one of my favorite ones. This is for undercutting the foot on your wheel. But I love it because when you're trying to slip and score or attach, if you get your thumb in there, it'll just slide around and all that slip. But for some reason, this dry wooden tool grabs a little bit more material. So I'm supporting the outside and I'm just pushing that clay down. Now we remember from last week and before that when you're attaching coils, you really want to to join down. It seems counterintuitive there too. You want height, why wouldn't you smush up? But especially with that first coil, we want to join down. And then on the exterior. Sometimes if you're trying to narrow a neck, you could, or if you can't really get your hand in there, that might be a different story. But right now, when I still have access to all the clay on the outside and the inside, I'm going to join down, supporting the outside when I'm doing the inside and supporting the inside when I'm doing the outside. So I want to gradually open this up. So I didn't get a lot of height on that first coil, but the good news is once I get it really well compressed, we can build pretty quickly now. Whereas in the first day or 2 of coil building, you kind of have to go slow because the clay is really wet. Now we've got this strong foundation, and we can add these nice, beautiful wet coils right to it. So one at a time, we're going to add another coil. And this time, I'm going to break one of the cardinal rules of ceramics, and I'm not going to slip and score at all. Because this clay is so wet. So if you'll remember from last time, the one time you can break the rules about slipping and scoring is when you're adding coil on fresh coil, when both coils or all the coils were made on the same day from the same bag of clay at the same time. Now, if I don't use all my coils today and I come back tomorrow to use the rest of them, I have to slip and score every single one because I didn't make it that day. So that's why I always tell you guys never to make more coils than you're going to use in one day, because it just creates more work for yourself. Now, if you're using a big old tool like the extruder, which when you're in the studio, we have an extruder which makes coils really quickly and really beautifully, very compressed, but it's a shared tool and we don't have access to it now in COVID. So, and I don't know if we will when we come back to in-person instruction. I don't know how long we're gonna be banned from using shared tools. It could be a long time, I don't know. So anyway, we were hand rolling coils, which people have done for millennia, so it's not that big of a deal. But the extruder is a cool tool that it hangs on the wall, and you put a bunch of clay in it, and then you just push it down, kind of like, it's like a caulking gun, I guess, kind of, but on the wall. And it's kind of a pain in the butt to clean, so it's almost sometimes easier if you just need a few coils to just roll them the good old-fashioned way. So again, I'm joining down, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna double check my work so I know that I didn't skip any areas, supporting the inside. And just like, once you get the hang of it, you can go kind of fast with this wooden tool. Just grab material and bring it down. Now, occasionally you may be finding that your coil pot is like a little thinner somewhere, like maybe as you were joining the coils, you inadvertently squeezed a little too much. When that happens, you can go ahead and add a little clay. So say I have a thin part here. I could just get some fresh clay out of my bag, almost like by the fingerful, sort of like that much, and just smush it in. Now, if it's leather hard clay you're trying to thicken, you want to slip and score. But if it's just like a little place where you squeeze too hard right here, you can add a little fingerful of coil. And sometimes I do that. What made me think of it is I have a seam here, and I don't like the looks of that seam. See how it doesn't look right? So that's where I wanted to add the fingerful of coil. And I did that on the inside, but you can do it on the outside. And then use your rib. Now in your toolkit you have a smooth metal rib and probably a blue rubber rib, and some of you may have other ribs. This is one of my favorites. It's a rectangular rib. It's actually a glue spreader from the glue department. But I think it works great. It also works like as kind of a bench scraper and an all-around just helpful tool to have. To clean the extruder with this. It's great for compressing slabs. So I like this tool so much that when I teach in-person class, I have a collection of like 40 of them, and I bring them to class so that everyone can benefit from the glue spreader. All right, so that was our second coil, and I've gotten a little height here. So what I want to do now, I'm gonna smoothie. Gotta talk and walk at the same time around here. So, what I want to do now is check my measurements against my scale drawing. So just making sure this is all adequately compressed and even and round, and it's still pretty level. But I want to check my measurements. So right now I'm just about 9 inches wide and 6.5 inches tall. So at 6 inches tall, I'm supposed to be 9 inches wide, so I'm calling it good. Now, if you want to narrow it, it's somewhat difficult. To make it wider is a little easier. You have a little extra material here that you can pinch out. I have another camera over here. I just got to check on it. That's my class. So if you see me glancing over here all the time, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking for my students, see if they need anything. Anyway, you have a little bit of material, so if you wanted to expand a little bit, you could just gently, gently expand. So my next coil, I don't need to get any wider, I just need to go up, because we're almost to we are pretty much at the widest part of the pot. So I'm gonna build up for a little, and then I'm gonna start to narrow. So this is pretty exciting. It's just, you know, it's a slow news day. I don't know. So coil on coil, the very same day I made them, from the same bag of clay, kept wrapped up nicely, and I don't have to slip and score. So and I'm putting this one directly on top, because all I want right now is a little bit of height. I don't want any more width. If you find yourself, your pot has gotten too wide, you can do one of two things. You can learn to love it the way it is, which I highly suggest, and then use your experience to make it better the next time. Or you can create some little dressmaker darts in it. So I don't want to do that right now. Maybe I'll do it on my other pot. But what I mean by dressmaker darts, if you sew, you'll know what this means. Almost like little facets. What you would do is cut a tiny little V into the wall of the pot, and you would cut a lot of tiny little V's, not just one, because if you just one, it's going to close up in one side. If you want it to close up evenly, you need to do a bunch of tiny little V's, narrow V's, and then join the clay. And in that case, you probably would want to score up a little bit and probably add some slip as well. Now I'm building straight up without widening anymore right now, so I just put this coil directly on top of the last. Then I'm going to measure again, and after I measure, I'm going to see if it's time to start to narrow. And if it is, I will start to narrow the pot, and by putting the coil a little bit on the inside. You want to do this gradually. So I would suggest that as you measure your scale drawing, that you start to narrow a little sooner. Hey Megan, start to narrow, hi. Start to narrow a little sooner than you need to, because it goes kind of slowly. The other thing you can see that this pot is jiggling a little bit as I build. That just means that the clay is really soft, right? So I may reach a point today, even though I have a ton of soft coils, when I need to take a break and let this piece rest a little bit and firm up. And sometimes that break, depending on the weather, is longer than you want it to be. And there's another really good reason to have two pots going at the same time, because when one needs a break, you can work on the other one. And like I said last week, when we're in the studio, we always have something to glaze or something to fire or something to clean. But when you're working at home, I like to have two pieces going. There's a reason we work in series and sets. What's up, Megan?
Nothing much.
Are you in the studio?
No, I'm actually not. I was gonna work on my ceramic stuff tomorrow, I think.
Okay, cool. Did you start building your coil pot yet?
I haven't started, but I definitely have an idea.
Good. Yeah, the research is due this week, and then, but I mean, don't let that stop you from starting to build. You have all the information you need.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. So I added the coil right on top, and I'm ribbing it on the inside and the outside. So on the inside, I'm supporting the outside, and I'm ribbing down and up and across and in a bunch of different directions at this point. I join down, but you can rib in any direction you want. So you're compressing particle no matter what. And once I get it well attached, I skipped a spot over here. Once I get it well attached, I want to measure again, because it's really important that I don't mess. It's really important. It's a life or death situation over here, that I don't deviate too much from my drawing, because when that happens, it's a little tricky to get it back on track. So I want to compress really well, then go back to the drawing and measure for height and width, and then add more coils. I also probably want to measure for level as well. So I get this level. I mean, I hate to plug the Dollar Tree, but I get this plastic level at the Dollar Tree for $1. And it's really super useful in the studio. That assumes that, you know, the table we're working on is level and all of that, which these are because they're brand new, really beautiful tables. I probably see a little bit of it, but some ceramic studios don't necessarily have level tables, like in my studio at home, for instance. So let's measure for height. A little hard to do because I'm not on a board. It's 7 inches. At 7 inches, I'm still 9, so I'm good. And then I don't know if you can see, like you can really tell where I stopped building yesterday and I started building today. That is one of those places where tomorrow I can scrape with my scraper and make those join really well. The other thing I could maybe think about doing is adding a tinier coil just to reinforce that seam. So like get a little tiny bit of clay, like super wet clay, and just kind of force it in there. Now you could slip and score that, but you're going to compress the shit out of it, so there's almost no point. It's going to laminate. You don't want to laminate thick pieces of clay, but little thin ones, especially with a ton of compression, are going to work just fine. And then don't worry too much about texture just yet. It's more about compression right now. So I don't know if you can see that this over here was kind of like, you could see the seam, and then I just laminated a super thin piece of clay and compressed it really well. So like, Megan, I don't know if you can, the lighting's not good here. You can see that there's like a little bit of a seam, and it's better there. Yeah, okay, cool. So I wanna see, 7 inches. I think I need a little bit more height, but by 7.5, I need to narrow by 1 inch. So I am gonna put the coil on the inside this time. And I'll show you what I mean by on the inside. It's not really on the inside. You need to go gradual. So I have my coils and I've kept them round. And when I lift them out, I'm putting them back on the pot in the same direction that they were winding before. It's really important that those particles all go in the same direction. Speaking of particle direction, you're going to end up with a bunch of scraps that you want to keep wet, and we can recycle these. So after I get this coil attached, I'll show you how we recycle clay. Okay. So I'm just like actually kind of paying close attention to this right now, rather than just yammering on, because I want it to narrow gradually and I want it to do it evenly all over. So you can see how it's kind of a little bit on the inside. And you see that's kind of a little bit on the inside, just gradually on the interior. And as I said, because we made these coils today and they're out of wet clay, we can just add coil on coil without slipping and scoring. It's the only time you can break that rule. Tomorrow, these coils need to be slipped and scored, every single one. So this is where, at the point in the day where you're not going to join down anymore. So because I want to narrow, this time I'm going to join up. But I'm really joining in, if you can see that. I'm supporting the inside and I'm dragging with this wooden tool. It's just like it's pretty dry and porous, so it's gonna grab a little clay and then release it. So I'm just like joining up here. Can't see it from where you are, Megan. Megan, do you have Instagram? Oh, hey, Ezra.
Yeah, I do. I was on the
You were on that
live a little bit earlier, but I think it was a bit easier for me.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, Ezra, were you just on Instagram too? I think I follow you. Do I follow both of you?
Yeah, I think I was on Instagram, but I switched over just because it's easier.
Yeah, it is easier, but it's easier to see everything on my phone because my phone's like vertical and my computer's horizontal, you know? So that's kind of why I'm on the Instagram. at the same time. But I'm recording all of this, so, you know, if you need to, if there's something you're not seeing. So you can see that it's just ever so slightly started to narrow. And I still got some work to do to get it well joined on the inside and the outside. So, probably don't want to punch it. So I'm going to use my thumb on the inside to join down this time, because I can't really get the tool in there without marring. The pots become narrow, so I can't get the tool in there without marring the inside. There's a little short wooden tool that I have, and I don't know where I got it, but I've never seen it since. And it's almost the identical shape of a thumb. It's like one of these, but it's the thickness and shape of the thumb, but it's made out of wood, and that's like the perfect tool for this. And I don't know where to get them. Maybe somebody can comment on that. Anyway, so the goal here is to begin to narrow, because I want this shoulder, we're right about this point now, and I want it to start to narrow into this neck. So I really do use the drawing a lot, which is why the drawing is so important. And you kind of want to love your drawing. You want to love the shape. So if you researched a pot that you love, but you love the shape of your drawing more, then go, and even if it's a little different than the pot, that's fine. Do the one you love. It's way more important. We were talking about that this morning in my drawing class, that, you know, well, their point in the discussion was that drawing makes you feel better, and feeling better makes you make better drawings. So we had this long discussion about, you know, quality, like what makes a good drawing and what makes a bad drawing, because when we're kids, we're taught that there's a such thing as a good drawing and a bad drawing. So these are advanced drawing students that I work with in the morning. So they're really, you know, they know what they're doing. They've been around for a little bit, and during this discussion, everybody had a bunch of different opinions on this topic, as you can imagine, but the overriding theme was really that if you enjoy the process, then the product gets better. And part of that has to do with, if you enjoy the process, you're going to do more of it. You're going to practice more, and if you practice more, you're going to improve. That's just how skill works. The more you practice correctly, the better you get. Some of you guys who have thrown on the pottery wheel maybe know what happens when you practice incorrectly, which is when you develop bad habits. Which is why it's kind of important to take a class with a pro once in a while, because you can. I was like for a great period of time more or less self-taught. I majored in something completely different in undergrad than I did in graduate school. So I was kind of rogue. I went rogue, and I had some bad habits. Hey, who's that? Oh, hey, Sane. That's a new profile picture, Sane. So anyway, about quality and drawing and art in general. So the more you enjoy it, the more you're going to practice. The more you're going to practice, the better you get. So it's sort of this circle. It's cyclical. Enjoyment equals better drawing equals more enjoyment and more practice and better drawing. And I'm sure it's true with all, in my opinion, it's true with all art. And I think that the only reason we really end up in ceramics class or in drawing class in the first place is because we think it's going to be fun, right? At least to a small extent, like we think it's going to be an enjoyable experience. And the bonus of ceramics and drawing or painting or any art class is that you know, you get to have fun and feel good, but at the end of the day, you also get to take something home with you, which is really great, something that you made yourself. So no offense to math class, but you know, you don't really get to take anything home with you at the end of the day. So, you know, all that to suffice to say, we're better. Just kidding, but we are. I think you need a balance of all of it, to be honest. Too much of anything just makes you crazy. And that's why I like teaching. I went to art school for my undergrad. I'm narrowing again, you guys. Pretty extreme narrowing at this point. So yeah, this coil went a little bit on the inside. And I want to join this coil, and then I'm going to check my drawing again. I went to art school in the early 1990s. So this was a long time ago. It may have changed, and I had a great time. Art school was a blast, but it was all artists. And everybody took themselves so seriously. And, and art was so serious. And I'm not to say that it isn't, because I've devoted my life to this practice. So clearly I take it seriously. But there's some point where you just, there's more to life, right? And I think the more you value other aspects of your life, the better artist you become, kind of, Because, it's a crude phrase, but you gotta get your head out of your ass. I don't know how else to say it. And life experience is one great way to do that. So I really love working, because I spent so much time in art school, I really love working in an art department that's not necessarily a school that's nothing but artists, because we have a good mix of people who are, really just interested in trying something new, and people who are like me, just all in, devoted to being an artist and art. So maybe I'm saying that I have my head up my ass a little bit. That could be true. But I am all in. The other thing about pleasure and fun is that it releases brain chemicals that reinforce memory. So I can't remember which ones they are, but I'm reading a book about it, but I haven't memorized it yet. It's like dopamine, serotonin, what's the one you get from chocolate? And happy endorphin kind of feelings. So the cool thing about that, about enjoying yourself, is that these brain chemicals actually reinforce memory. So when you have a heightened, pleasurable experience, you remember it more. So when it comes to learning, it can reinforce your learning to be having fun while you're learning. So as an educator, I think it's really important to make sure my students are having a good time. And it's not just because that's my personality, but now I have brain science to back it up. So, once you get to know me, you'll realize that I'm a bit of a goofball. And now I know that that's, bona fide educator technique for reinforcing learning. All right? So don't at me, as my kid would say. Or you can at me all you want, actually. So I'm holding the outside and pushing down with that inside finger to get those coils joined. It's pretty awesome. It feels really good. So I don't know, what other classes can you take where you actually get to take something home with you outside of the arts, Besides, knowledge, which is priceless, obviously. Your writing classes, right? If you do a bit of writing, that could be something you keep forever. In graduate school, you do. All your writing will pertain to your thesis for the most part, so it's all going to be worthwhile, Once you get to graduate school, you really don't do work you don't really do work you're never going to use again, because you specialize your program to the extent that you're only taking things that are going to reinforce your ability to do your thesis work, which pertains to your career and your life goals, obviously. So every bit of research and writing you do would ultimately, should and could, doesn't always, but for the most part, it ultimately informs your thesis work. So, sometimes when you're early in your college career and you're taking a class, you're like, that's required, you're like, I'm never gonna use this information. Once you get to grad school, you use all of it. So we are at about 8.5, 9 inches. So 8.5, I should be 8 8 narrowing to 7. So I'm at 7. This is pretty good because by 9 inches I need to be at 6. So I need to do some extreme narrowing now. But I did quite a bit of narrowing. So what happens at this point is that I can't cantilever clay and expect it to just sit in space. No matter how well I compress it, this needs to firm up a little bit before I can narrow anymore. Otherwise, I run the risk of caving in. So with clay, you always have to wait until the clay is ready to do whatever that next step is. And sometimes that involves waiting, as we know. So if it's too wet and I try to force it, I could end up with a cave in and it'll just make a big mess, and I don't really want that. But now would be a good time to wrap. So here's what I started with today, this is what I added. So about 4 inches, and it's much drier down here than it is up here, and this is the seam. So I'm gonna work that seam a little bit more, but for now, since I'm gonna set this aside, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wrap the base and leave the top exposed. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I don't have a crappy piece of plastic. One of the things about ceramics that kind of sucks is that we use a lot of plastic, but the good thing about it is we reuse it again and again and again. So we're not creating a ton of plastic waste. So when you see this like janky old kitchen garbage bag, it probably wasn't ever used for kitchen garbage, but it's probably been used like dozens, maybe hundreds of times. And so what I would do is I would just wrap the base like this. And sometimes I'll even tuck a piece of plastic on the inside of the pot. That way, that seam, we're starting to let some air hit the top of the pot, but the seam is covered and the clay underneath is covered. Now, the exterior matters more because in this interior space, there's less airflow. But I mean, if I'm gonna put this away for the day, I might stick a piece of plastic on the interior seam as well. So now I can go and work on my other piece. So I handy dandy other piece. And if you have other things in the studio to work on, so you guys should always have like a couple of small pieces, just a couple fun things that you're working on while you're working on your major projects. And that gives you something to play with. So, you know, you get assignments and you have to do them, and then there's deadlines, but play is really important too. You have to, otherwise, you know, that's where creativity happens. Like when you allow yourself to experiment and have some fun. And they might be just that, you know, maybe you just want to squeeze some clay and see what happens. Or maybe you had this pet project in mind that you always really wanted to try, or maybe there's something you're not sure if not sure if it's gonna work, so you didn't want to like make it your body of work. You don't want to invest it with all that importance. I think that's a really good time to play with clay and have some fun, you know, try something new. And those things, once you make a thing, you kind of own it. You have muscle memory, it's imprinted in your brain. So there's a difference between thinking about a project and squeezing out a little maquette or even doing a drawing or a diagram or some notes. It's like once you make it, you own it forever. And the more you make it, the more it imprints in your brain. So just like, I'm sure you've read the research on taking longhand notes in classes, that as opposed to notes on the computer or the iPad or whatever, that your longhand, even recordings aren't as good, even though you can rewatch them. So the process of putting pencil or pen to paper reinforces learning as well. And so that's why I'm such a big proponent of doodling during lectures. So you don't necessarily have to be like zoning out, but a little doodling and sketching during lectures rather than taking notes can actually have a similar effect. It can help reinforce the information because you're giving your hands something to do. Taking notes is fine too, if that's your bag. I prefer people, when I'm lecturing, I prefer people not to take notes. I don't mind if they're working along or doodling, but if you're constantly switching, you're not really listening. You know, when you're doodling, you're not really switching. You're just allowing your hand to wander. But you're not mentally switching from listening to writing to listening to writing to listening to writing, and that's going to interfere with the learning too. So I slipped and scored really well because this was the first coil of the day on this pot, and I know you need to slip and score really well. And this first coil, I'm not expecting much height out of it because this piece I made a few days ago, and it's approaching leather hard, and my new coils are super wet, and I'm keeping them covered. So what I really want to do is prepare the piece for subsequent coils with that first coil. I want to make that seam, that transition from almost leather hard clay to wet clay. I want to make that like a nice seamless transition, really important transition. If the piece is going to crack and pull apart in the drying and firing, it's going to do that on one of those seams that was like the day before to the next day, the new seam of the day. So we want to make sure that we really compress those really well and joining down again. And I don't know, I just grabbed this rib, but I like this dry wooden tool too. So I was like, I don't really have that much to share with you today, so I was like, oh, I'll probably cover it all in 20 minutes. And now it's been 45, so I guess I did have a lot to talk about. I mean, I'm a talker, so whatever. I'm not really adhering to my scale drawing with this one because unlike my beautiful curvy drawing, this piece, when I started making it, like ended up being a little bit more angular. So this is just like my fun one. So I'm really going to my scale drawing with the previous one, and for this one, I'm just gonna goof off with it. So that's why I'm not really measuring right now. The paddle I can use to reinforce that seam too. Because this is really dry wood, it will compress without sticking. Once it gets fully hydrated though, you can have some problems with sticking. So I'm just like supporting the inside and tapping with this dry tool, and then paying close attention to where it's getting hydrated, because if we keep overhydrating this surface, it'll stick, and when you try to pull it off, it'll like pull your clay. So it's kind of defeating the purpose. Also with the paddle, I'm like kind of going down a little bit as I compress. So I'm holding the inside of the clay, supporting it, and like kind of smacking it, but going down at the same time. So any old 2x4, 1x3 wooden spoon, anything that's not treated. Sure.
Instructions, but do you ever mention like a size that it has to be a specific size, like how small would it be?
Yeah, so I want it to be a minimum of 12 inches tall. So it's kind of important that they occupy a good amount of space because there's surface design that we're going to do on them, and it's really hard to do a really in-depth surface design without the space to manifest it, you know? So 12 inches. And so that's why when I said, like, some of you might have giant pieces of paper, who knows, maybe you do, or maybe you have some old-fashioned newspaper or newsprint. But you can tape a couple sheets of paper together for your scale drawing if you don't have a large sheet of paper. Here in the studio, like next week we have a big roll of butcher paper. That's what we use for our drawings. So 12 inches or taller. So 12 inches is kind of a bridge size. It's manageable to do at home, but and it's big enough to have enough surface to design. But ideally, they'd be 14 or 16 inches. But if we could count on being together in the studio when making them, then I would say I would give you a larger size. So there's something really cool about being able to make something that large, you know? Even if you're a total beginner, you can make a 14 or 16 inch pot or sculptural vessel of some sort And it's pretty powerful. It's a pretty powerful experience, because when you get to wheel throwing, which some of you guys have already done, but it's going to take a lot of effort just to make something 3 inches tall. So if you've already got a 14, 16, 18 inch pot under your belt, you'll be like, okay, you know, I know I can do that. So I maybe have a little bit more patience with myself while I join, while I try to learn wheel throwing. So that's kind of the backstory with this. So not only do we want it large so that we have a lot of surface area, but we want it large so that we can like experience the experience of making something big, because it's powerful. It's going to occupy space, and it's going to be around for 10,000 years. So it's pretty important work we're doing here. I say that with a laugh, but actually I mean it. This stuff could be around for hundreds or thousands of years after we're gone, and this is how anthropologists are going to tell the story of what it felt like to be alive today. This is how they're going to do it, because all of this digital stuff that we're creating is going to be gone. I can't even read files I made on the computer 20 years ago. So imagine what that's going to be like in 100 years or 200 years or 10,000 years. But you know what's going to be there is this stuff. So while everybody's busy, you know, creating digital stuff, which is super fun and I'm all for it, but at the end of the day, we are writing the history of what it means to be alive today. We are creating that right now with these pots and with everything we make, and these will be the artifacts that future anthropologists study to find out what our culture was all about. So it's really important that we invest a bit of ourselves in and storytelling in this, because as we already know, the people who write history are not necessarily always us, you know? So we know that history is super flawed, and it's only the story told by one group of people about one group of people's experience, right? So we need to write some history over here. 7.5, I don't know, I'm just like checking to see if it's level, and it's not. So I'm going to paddle the rim a little bit before I keep building. So another use for your paddle, your 2x4 or your 1x3, is support the piece. And sometimes I'll pinch it while I paddle down. And sometimes I will just hit one side, support one side. And this is a way to get the rim compressed, but also a way to, hey Katie Preston. It's also a way to get it level. So like I said before, if your pot's not level and you add coils, it's gonna continue to be not level. So when you use your level, you want to use it in a couple of different dimensions here. And it looks pretty good. And now when I paddle down, I'm actually thickening the rim too. It does thicken the rim in addition to compress it. So if I pinch up, just compress up, pinch it up, thin it a little bit. If I do that evenly, I shouldn't throw it off level. And then because I compressed this rim, it's never wrong to score or slip. I'm just saying that when the conditions are ideal with your coil pot, you can skip slipping and scoring when it's those coils that were made on the same day from the same clay that have been, you know, kept under plastic and are super wet. But like if you do something like compress the rim like I did here, then I'm getting those particles going in another direction now. So now would be a good time, even though it's wet clay and I'm joining coil to coil from wet clay I just used today, my instinct is telling me to score up a little bit, because in the action of paddling, I change directions of those top particles there. And particles are really important. They are, man. I'm all about particle direction. So I'm just laying this on here to measure it. I don't know, should we go in? Or I think we should go out a little bit more, one more time. And then I'm gonna lay it down and score it. I don't know why I have this disgusting towel here. Let's get rid of that. I mean, all towels in the ceramic studio are disgusting. There's nothing personal to my towel, but they're always gross in here because we use them. I don't know, I'll show you what I mean by gross towel. I mean, is that an attractive towel or what? Something about the color of this clay, I'm just saying. Anyway, so I'm scoring. I'm not gonna go crazy with a slip, but I am gonna score now that, because I know I changed the direction of that particle. And I can keep building until this pot starts to wiggle, and it gives me this idea that it doesn't want to support any more weight. So that's what I'm gonna do. What did I say we were gonna go out a little bit more? When we go out a little bit more, when we want to expand it, we want to put that coil just ever so slightly on the outside. But really it's on top, but there's just a little bit on the outside. And just make sure that scoring is lined up really well, and then we can join. All right, well that is all I have for you guys. I'm gonna hang out a little bit longer and talk to you guys. So thanks for being here. I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to stop. Oh, yeah, I do.